Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to see my speech. What I just showed you is an illustration of a military bugle call. Now, I'd like you all to try to imagine the scene of a battle. Okay, there's many warriors. This is back in history. You have, the Spartan warriors getting ready to go to war, or the Israelites getting ready to take, a city. And the next thing you see, thousands of soldiers getting ready to fight. It's a battle scene. Everyone's tense. Everyone's emotions are high. You don't know if you're going to live or you're going to die. The next sound you hear is roaring horns that ignite the troops and initiate the start of the battle. Bugle calls have played a huge role in history, and they're still relevant today across military installations. And the things I would like to discuss with you now are the origin of bugle calls, their uses throughout history, and how they are used today. The bugle call was originally invented from hollowed-out animal horns, tusks, various, natural instruments, and even some wood examples. And they often had a sort of warm, mellow timbre. They didn't project quite as well as some of the modern trumpets and bugles we have today. Later models were progressed to start being made of metal. They projected better, had a brighter sound, and eventually began to be a more effective means to communicate to troops, personnel, and ceremonies as they were used. These metal bugles eventually led on to the invention of the trumpet, which is typically how bugle calls are played today. Made obsolete by the trumpet, history defines its use today as, how we apply it day to day. The early bugles, the ones made by horns and then later on brass instruments, were used by Egyptians and Israelites in religious ceremonies and even sunrise and sunset, which correlate to us playing morning colors, evening colors, reveille, and taps. Depicted for use of marching troops and personnel in some of the early Egyptian illustrations, they show that bugle calls have been used to move people since almost the founding of bugles in their very beginning. The role changes throughout history, and their purpose and their use could often be defined by what country, what era we talk about. In many medieval areas, they would be used to dignify and honor royalty, or large events. They would add pompous and flair and a level of ceremony that would not be present without their presence. They've also been used throughout history to command troops. Like as illustrated whenever I started this speech, talking about how to initiate troops for battle. It inspires a sense of pride, honor, and it can also give specific commands like charge, retreat, stand at ease, different commands based on what era we're speaking of. From traditions to modern use, we typically use bugle calls for more ceremonial purposes today. In the Marine Corps marching band, for instance, we typically use bugle calls to signal Marines to march on or direct specific troop movements, especially in large ceremonies like changes of command. So you would give sound attention, which would give the troop commanders the signal to call their troops to attention, and then sound adjutant's call, which tells these platoons to march onto the parade field. They're also used to mark daily events. On our Marine Corps Recruit Depot, for instance, we use that to mark reveille, morning colors, chow call, mail call, and other evolutions of the day that signal to the personnel on the base the time of day, what's going on the base, and just gives you a level of awareness. They're also used to render honor to the national colors. As stated before, you have to the color and taps, which are, or retreat, excuse me, played to retreat, which is to honor the national ensign in the morning and in the evening. The other use we commonly use most in bugle calls is to render honor to our fallen comrades. The bugle call we typically play is called taps, an emotional, moving bugle call which represents the honor and dignity of the sacrifice that these personnel have made for our country and for us who live in the uniform today. It's always important to take what the historical meaning of bugle calls have applied through history, and I think it's thoroughly appropriate to use that for those situations. In conclusion, bugle calls have played a huge role in history, almost regardless of what era you speak of. Bugle calls have been leading people through almost every age, whether it would be to start a battle, to mark the end of the battle, to honor personnel, the colors, and march troops, lead troops. And only time will tell what the future will hold and how we will use bugle calls in the future. Thank you. I appreciate your attendance, and that concludes my speech.